Okay, so I might as well start. This is Benjamin Fulford about to interview Simon Parkes on February 2nd, 2019. Now, let's start, Mr. Parkes, with a very simple question. If somebody never heard of you, how would you introduce yourself? Like very briefly. Who do you represent? What are you doing? What is it? What are your activities?
Well, I probably don't represent anybody except myself. However, I hope that some of the views and ideas I have are beneficial to humanity. So perhaps in a way, I'm trying to represent, that aspect of humanity. In terms of myself, I suppose I came to fame or infamy by going public with my off-planet experiences. My parents coming from security backgrounds. And then I think that developed to becoming fully aware that the truth wasn't being released to the general public. And so those connections that I'd made over the last 8 years, I was able to access that and start trying to get the truth out to people. So that's really what I'm about.
Okay, now when you say off planet, could you be a bit more specific?
Yes. So as long as I can remember. Excuse me, Ben, I've just got a bit of a cold. That's why I didn't do my TED Mile radio show last night.
Right. Well, then we won't be too long then, I suppose.
I'm all right. That's okay. I'm talking about interaction with mantis, draconian or draconis reptilians, feline group, some of the greys. I don't like the greys at all. Some of those, a whole range of these beings ever since I was very, very little.
Okay, now, here's a question for people who are operating in what we call a 3D, like myself. Is that if I walk down, say, the London street, okay, I'll be able to see some Asians and some Africans and stuff, and I can tell they're real because you can see them every day. But most of us, we don't see these reptilians or these greys or whatever, shopping at the duty-free store or anything like this. So, why is that?
Well, I think actually, if you went to Vegas, you'd probably see them there, come out of Area 51, probably on a bit of a little holiday jaunt. But generally, you don't fully see them, although some people report seeing them, simply because it's been generally agreed that the humanity is not in a position yet to accept this truth. Now, I disagree with that. My point of view is that humanity needs to be told everything. We need to trust humanity and let them make the judgment. But at the moment, there's this view that the vast majority of people are children, and therefore they're just not ready to do it. So these things do go out there. They do go in disguise. They're heavily guarded or chaperoned, shall we say. And from time to time, very psychic people do see things which they report, and they even get as far as the newspapers sometimes.
Okay, well, that's another question. I hear a lot of people say that when you're dealing with aliens, it's not like getting on a rocket ship or getting in a sort of warp drive and going many times the speed of light to another star, but rather it's like changing the channel on the television or a different spectrum of the electromagnetic frequencies that they inhabit. What's your view on this sort of stuff?
Well, I think there are what I would call real extraterrestrials, real ETs, and these are ones that live in the same time frame that we do. And I think Charles Hall, who was a weatherman in Area 51, he talked about what he called the tall whites. Now, as far as I know, these are actually real ETs, which means that they take maybe 25 years to get here. So they are operating, without being disrespectful to them, they are operating very primitive craft, actually. And those arrive here maybe 25 years, but the mantis or the draconian reptilians, they arrive via, the ones I've seen anyway, they arrive via portal. So they are able to bend time. So when they arrive, they don't take 25, 30 years to get here. They arrive far, far faster than that.
Now, then the other question for a lot of us is, why can't we go to the spaceport and get a ticket on a rocket to another planet, or to the local portal, you know, and go to a different planet? What clearly we're under some form of quarantine.
Well, you raised two very good points here. The same reason that I can't go and buy lots of gold on the market because I'm not an elite person, so therefore I don't have access to the elite part of it. But the other section is that there is a quarantine around the Earth. There's a double quarantine. There was a quarantine that the reptilians put on the planet because they didn't want anyone else coming in. And then recently, the good guys put a quarantine around the planet to stop the bad guys coming in. So we know recently that a probe has landed on the far side of the moon, not an American one. And although it's very primitive, it's the point that that's sending is they obviously got permission to put an unmanned probe on the far side of the moon, and they are sending a huge message to the United States of America and everyone else saying that whichever group they're in connection with has given them permission to start doing stuff on the far side of the moon. So there's a great deal going on. Ordinary people don't have access to the information, they don't have access to that, but those who are either in the special group military or the secret societies, they do have access, or at least if they don't have access, Ben, they've got knowledge.
All right. Well, all right. Look, as you know, I don't usually write or talk about this sort of stuff because I'm trying to communicate with the people, you know, who have the more
I don't
narrow framework.
Huge amount now either, for the same reason.
But I will mention a few things that I've personally dealt with on this level since we're having this interview. Now, you talked about the Chinese and the Asians having ET contacts. I was taken by members of a Japanese secret society that some people would equate with like a Yakuza crime gang, but they're not really. But anyway, they took me to a special temple in Ginza, and it was filled with solid gold altars, shall we call them, with strange alien writing on them. And these people told me they did contact with extraterrestrials, and they did it via certain ceremonies. But I personally did not, contact see any such extraterrestrials when I visited this place. However, also when a member of the Rothschild family and also the British royal family arranged a meeting with some gentleman from a group called the Dragon family in Singapore. And he said that if you want to talk to China, this is as high as it goes. And the person was an Asian royal, and this person also claimed they had contact with extraterrestrials and they had extraterrestrial support, and that if necessary, they would, put the planet under strict, rule if we, didn't stop our, destructive ways. Now, the other time I encountered such again, it's always secondhand, okay? But there's one more time. The arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi, whose nephew was recently apparently horrifically murdered at the Saudi consulate in Turkey, Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist. Well, his uncle, Adnan Khashoggi, is a very famous arms dealer who came up in the Iran-Contra scandal. Well, he sent a very beautiful young woman to one of my public meetings, and she sort of basically told me she'd been sent by him, and she was a honey trap, okay? A very beautiful one, too. But anyway, she told me that she had had her womb experimented with and been subject to all sorts of, strange treatment by beings that resemble what you read about as the Anunnaki, large humanoids. And again, this is secondhand. I didn't see the Anunnaki. But a lady connected to a famous arms dealer told me that they had experimented with her. So that's another, these are these little things that I don't usually put out there because they don't fit my,
Sure.
what I'm trying to do. But since you're on that area, I share you what I've learned.
Oh, that's
by
nice.
reporting.
I think, to be honest, that when people move in these off-grid areas, then they will come into contact, or they will have information that comes their way, which is not for general. But yes, the last few years I've concentrated more on the needs of trying to wake people up, simply because my stories, whilst I'm sure they're very interesting, it doesn't, from a point of view of the world, it doesn't actually take us forward. But trying to give people heads up on warnings that I'm picking up on, a counterbalance to what's coming out in the newspapers, that I think is more helpful during this very crucial period. Example, I don't want to be known as the go-to man on this, but somebody had found something on the dark web about 3-4 weeks ago now, which purported to be an audio recording of a very high current American politician torturing a child. And this had been got on the dark web and sent to me. So I managed to send it on to somebody who then it went to Langley and had a look at it and came back. It only took 2 weeks. I was very impressed with that. Came back and said that it was confirmed that this was this American politician. They'd done a voice print check, and it would be added to some criminal charges that were in the production of.
Yeah, so, I've seen the video, or at least a very short part before I you know.
Yeah, it's an audio. It wasn't video.
Hillary Clinton, yes?
No.
Okay.
Not Clinton. This is another one.
A different one.
Yes, and it's just an audio recording of a child being tortured. But
that would be Podesta then.
Yeah, you're on the right lines there.
This stuff's out there, you know. A lot of us are getting the same stuff. Okay, now there's another one. I've been, you know, again, I deal with this firsthand. I have, you know, come across a group of people who worship what we call Baal or Molech or Set or Satan, and who carry out human sacrifices. And there's plenty of whistleblowers coming out now. There's lots of evidence. And are these people, why do these people carry out these sacrifices? Are they actually contacting an entity or getting power from an entity like they say they are when they do this stuff?
Depending on the ritual. There's several rituals. One would be to keep the group together. You have a disparate group of people whose only connection is through this religion. I'm going to call it a religion, just for the ease of this conversation. So part of that is to remind these people that they are under the control of and part of, and they owe their allegiance to this. There are different types of ceremonies that bring forth an entity. You know yourself that the Rothschilds perhaps once a year will form a big circle. The big heavy chair in the side is kept, and then the entity will come in there and take a report from each person around the room. The other one is literally about drinking blood. Two types of blood. There's menstrual blood, and there's also children's blood, because of the chemicals that it will give. Some of that will reduce aging. Some of it is very important to some of these beings that exist in a different format within a human being. So there's loads of different rituals, and depending on who is officiating, what the purpose is, what the star planet connection is at that time, you know, the heavens is very important. So yes, absolutely, it's a fundamental part of their not just their belief, but their control system.
Okay, now is this? I mean, is this? They still seem to be in control of this planet, but they also definitely appear to be losing control of this planet. What's your understanding of the current state of the battle for the planet Earth?
Well, that's a really, really good question, isn't it? And I ask myself that not every day, but probably once a week. Mainly when I see these rather ridiculous people writing things on the internet saying the battle's over. We're all in the fifth dimension. Everything's fantastic. And then I go out and I see things which just fly in the face of that. I think there's been a huge shift away from total control. I think if we're going back 10, 15 years ago, the planet was in a very, very, very cotton wool condition. We are now in a situation where key individuals, I'm not saying key individuals have been taken out, but what I am saying is key individuals are moving aside. Key individuals are either retiring leaving the planet, for want of a better word, or just retiring, and there aren't the numbers coming forward to replace them because nobody wants to be the guy who gets shot at. Also, there are a number of people in medium managerial positions who are now jumping ship, deciding that this is not the way forward anymore. So the top group are still there, they're still in control, but the amount of control they have is no longer total. And if they've looked into the crystal ball lately, they know that their days are numbered, and yet, like an ostrich, they hope that by one more, it's a bit like Adolf Hitler, isn't it? The secret weapons. Don't worry, we won't lose the war. The Russians may be knocking at the door, but we've got a secret weapon here. And that's what they're doing. They're just hoping that something is going to come along, rather than sit around the table and say, okay, let's negotiate this. Rather than do that, they're still going down fighting. And that's not brave, that's just stupidity on their part.
Where and who are these people, and who are they?
Majority of them are in Europe, believe it or not. They're not in America anymore. I think it was Donald Trump that said there was more evil in Europe than there was in China or Russia or anywhere else. And there's a lot of truth in that. There are a lot of European families who can all connect to one family, but they've all set themselves up and they've become demigods. They actually lost touch with anything around them, and they just think they rule like a king. So Europe's got a number of families. America, of course, has individual people now, not just groups, but individual. They're fractured. They're in individuals. Some of the major organizations that we would, like the Rothschilds, we would hold up. Actually, they're looking to reposition themselves. Certainly, the Rothschilds are definitely trying to reposition themselves. And then, of course, we have a small faction of a Jewish group, maybe from Europe, not from Israel at all, Kazakhstanian area, who have their own vision of what the world should be like. So, yes, it's groups, but it's also individuals now.
Yeah, I know that there's one concentration in the Calabrian Peninsula in Italy. I know Milan and northern Italy is another. And then, of course, a lot of the trail leads to Switzerland. And in particular, I've noticed a huge complex that used to be controlled by Mark Rich in Zug, Switzerland, where it seemed to be the origin of all this 30 years of, we got a nuke Iran type of stuff that was in all the world's news reports for like 30 years, originated from there. And that they were controlling both Iranian and Israeli politicians while making it look like they were, mortal enemies. And they seem to be losing that plot too. What's your take on that? I mean,
well, I've always said to people, ask yourself why Switzerland is never invaded. Why does nobody ever declare war on Switzerland? And it's not just because that's where the banks are, it's because that's where the powerhouse is. And people who are declaring war or fighting know that when they come out of the war, they're going to, under this paradigm, they're going to need that organization. They need the support or the cover of that organization. And so that has actually almost been in a political war with Strasbourg in Europe, that considers itself the country or the center of Europe. So you have these sort of interesting power plays between politicians in Strasbourg and the old blood, if we can call them that, in Switzerland. And the puppet masters have to have some location. And I think that things are playing out now where a lot of these organizations that were manipulated are now saying, we don't want to play the game anymore. So the people are still there. They're still there in their power and position, but maybe their influence is reduced dramatically. Well, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I did notice, okay, we had a lot of royals abdicating. I think Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, now in Japan. And then we had a pope quitting. What do you know about this?
I used to do pictures of the Pope when he was just about the old Pope was about to give ground, and I showed pictures of him and showed how his physical body was deteriorating and changing. There are only so much things you can do to an individual like that to keep them actually ticking over and working. If you're threatened with a legal prosecution, or not in the typical sense of being taken to a court, shall we say, but in a different form. A lot of these people are told, resign and we won't take action against you, or leave your position. Because I had this on the radio show where I was saying that I do understand there are some indictments that have been opened and they've been acted on, but not in the public eye. And I understand that, but I want public involvement, because if it's all done behind doors, there's no confirmation for the public that the good guys are winning. It's no good key players suddenly disappearing off the earth as if by magic, and yet, you know, people are still going to pay their taxes. They're still going to by the system. So Ben, what I'm saying is that what I'm asking for when I do my radio shows to the people and to the universe at large is for people to begin to see the good guys practically taking action.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we all want to see them, you know, in handcuffs in a Nuremberg style tribunal with the whole world knowing exactly what they did, because otherwise they're just gonna, you know, replace one secret controller for another secret controller and try to put on a nice face until the sheep calm down again. I think that's what they're trying to do, you know. Wow. And that's not going to work this time. I agree with you. We need to really make this happen in a visible way. I was very disturbed, for example, my sources are telling me that Nancy Pelosi was stopped from leaving the country because she was going to go to Afghanistan to get opium and then sell it in Israel and then bring back cash. And I was thinking, well, all right, if she's going to do that, why isn't she in handcuffs? Why is she still sitting there, you know, doing power plays? Why hasn't she been put in jail? And why haven't the American people read about this in their corporate newspapers, you know? And a lot, I mean, there's many things like that, of course. We all know about the Uranium One and Hillary Clinton, but somehow the public trials haven't taken place. Why do you think that's the case? Who's blocking it now? I mean, I'm dealing with, I actually have people who can actually take action, but we need to know who exactly to target.
Right. I believe it's about the nuclear option. I don't mean the nuclear bomb. Once that decision is made, there's no going back on it. And it becomes an exchange of actions. Whilst both sides are just tinkering around the edges, there isn't a full-blown in-your-face war. There has to come a point, because President Trump has only got a year left, whether he stands or not. I'm not convinced he would restand again, but he's got 1 year left. If it doesn't happen in 2019, Ben, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it has to be this year, because no other way will the positions of power be more equitable. In other words, the balance of power on the planet has never been so near equal as it is as we speak. There are key players who could easily be arrested tomorrow. The only reason they're not must be that the network they control is still incredibly powerful. And that network can bring down a country, not a government, but a country economically. And so I can only imagine that whoever is the good guys are still holding back because they fear the retribution once they start those actions. And that's bad, because you know, I think of the days of the French Revolution. The French had a supposed revolution. All the rich people supposedly had their heads cut off. All their chateaus, their grand houses were taken. Then the common people got together and said, we don't have any money. I know, let's sell all these chateaus. The only people who could buy the chateaus were the very families who'd been dispossessed in the first place. So they sold the chateaus right back to those very rich people who then came back. What was the point of the revolution? It did nothing. And that happens time and time again on this planet. And I 100% share with you that there will be a vacuum created at the moment of revolution. The problem is are we ready to put a new system of government in with new individuals with no corrupt history, or is it just going to be retaken over again? So that's my concern.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, the French Revolution was one scenario where you had a lot of chaos and bloodshed and suffering before you got a new equilibrium. Although, there were a lot of, improvements. I mean, the metric system and all sorts of other things came out of it, but, but yeah, it's not the ideal we want to follow.
Not at all. I mean, look, look at the bloody president of France at the moment. He's a ex-banker, passing laws and regulations that strangle ordinary people, and he's got no concept of of how ordinary people live. Yet this is the country that had a revolution to remove all that. So that's what I'm saying, that they're very clever. They're very clever, and they bring it in. And I still truthfully don't understand why an organization in America that has the backing of the vast majority of the military, has the backing of maybe 35 to 40% of the CIA, maybe 75 backing of the National Security Agency, why those people aren't now moving against those very, very corrupt American people.
All right, I think, all right, there's a couple of things there. One is that they all agree that the current system isn't working, but they still haven't come to a consensus on what to replace it with. And there are several factions that are pushing. Like the Chinese are saying, it's our turn to be the center of the world. We're always the natural middle, and look at all the great things we're doing with our one road, one belt thing, and we have a better system. And then you have the American military-industrial complex with one group saying we're going to do this GESARA, global currency reset, and that's going to do it. And then you have the European royals saying, okay, the whole plan to kill 90% of the population was a mistake, so we're going to go with, carbon taxes instead. And these seem to be the three big factions duking it out right now, as far as I can tell. And again, I've been trying to, convince all the different factions that at least one thing we can agree on is set up a whole new agency to plan the future for this planet and finance a massive campaign, like not, like $1 trillion type of campaign, like the one, the Chinese one, to clean up the planet, to stop the destruction of the natural ecosystems, and, to plan our future, to say, what kind of planet do we want this to be? How can we make it happen? And at least start with something like that. And that can function under any of these different systems. It's not, whichever faction wins, this idea still works. So anyway, that's what I'm personally been, lobbying for and pushing for. And I
absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I have one person that I was even talking to yesterday on Skype, heading a consortium, who have come up with a ability to refine petroleum and not produce any waste, no toxic chemicals, no outspilling of this. They've got planning permission, and they've been meeting senators, etc., etc. And I was saying to them that one of the big problems we've got is corporations don't want to go into a new world where they don't have that sort of position. But if I said you have got a method for producing oil with no pollutants, and with the profits of that you can clear landmines in Asia, with the profits of that you can build desalination plants and provide drinking water, then these corporations just move to producing these things, because they still have their corporation, but they actually produce benefit for the planet. And we can't go from 0 to 60 on this earth. We can't say to people who have used money all their lives and understand profit, you can't go from that to say, tell you what, let's just have a jolly little barter trade system. They can't do that. So we've got to move this planet, or the people on it, gently into a new paradigm of understanding, sharing, and being part of the world they live in. So there are issues, not issues, there are new initiatives out there, but they're being squashed because they're seen as threatening. And that's what we have, this change in attitude.
I've always, had the same view. For example, if you say, okay, we're going to have world peace and we're going to stop manufacturing arms, then you have some very powerful, very rich people who happen to have lots of weapons. We're saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to, be, a homeless beggar, when I'm living in this opulent castle. I'm going to hire my goons and we're going to stop this,
Yeah.
So you got to say to these people, no, look, you're going to be exploring the universe and doing other things that'll be even more profitable than selling tanks to Egyptians, and then they'll go for it. You know?
Totally agree. And, it's not realistic for these people who live in, I suppose I'm being disrespectful, but I call it unicorn and rainbow land. We can't move this entrenched position from one to the other immediately. It's got to be through education. There's got to be carrot and stick approach. And I'm sure that there will be Nuremberg style trials where people will walk out exonerated. Absolutely. There will be people who are found not guilty. There'll be people who have found that they were being blackmailed into doing things, therefore they're not really guilty. And then there will be a small hardcore of people who are totally corrupt and will be found guilty. But in order to cleanse the energies, to bring a marker to this phase of humanity and move us on to the next phase of humanity, we need this closure. And therefore, there has to be some form of accountability. That's what I believe in.
Yeah, and I think that a good place to start is with the 9/11 stuff, the World Trade Center building, because this is a sort of false flag they've been doing forever and getting away with it. Suddenly, we found out. Well, the sinking of the Lusitania was conspiracy theory until 2014, when they finally admitted actually, it was filled with munitions. But now people find out, I mean, the aware section of the population finds out within hours if they've carried out one of these false flags.
Yes.
And so their old tools aren't working.
Yes.
But yeah, so, to get from here to there, in any case, to make this happen, there's, I think, a few key groups that are negotiating. You have the Chinese and the Americans, the public part of it, which is the trade talks between the Trump cabinet
and the upfront part. Yeah.
That's definitely important because, the Americans are bankrupt, and the only way that they're going to be unbankrupt is if somebody buys real stuff from them, and the only people who can do that in the necessary quantities are the Chinese. So it's a lot of American stuff's going to go to China, and that's going to help them pay their bills. That's one thing we can see already that's going to happen.
Sure. Yeah.
On another level, I'm talking to people in the P2 Freemasons, and I'm talking to people in the British royal family and the American, military-industrial complex about getting this future planning agency started. And there's a basic agreement on all fronts, as far as I can tell. Right now, it seems to be that the blockage is originating with Pope Francis, of all places, and the Jesuits. And if we can get them on board, then it might happen. And maybe
I totally agree, Ben. I totally agree. I mean, some of the projects on the earth that I would consider to be very, very good for the earth, I know the Queen of England is personally funding through other sources. Oh yeah, they're going to make money on it, but they're actually funding projects which will bring benefit to the earth, and that's how much they've moved. Now, I am expecting Her Majesty the Queen of Great Britain to be abdicating fairly soon. I expect her to abdicate quite soon and hand the baton over. You're right about the Pope. This position where he has to take orders from the Black Pope, just as there's a black sun to our ordinary star, so this very strong satanic type control exists.
The Black Pope now, he's a Venezuelan, right?
Yeah.
And something to do with, what do you know about what's going on in Venezuela and the Venezuelan Black Pope?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it, that you have a system where the military have done planning war games now. The American military, they can't quite go to 20,000, which is the number they're going to need. It's no good just dropping 5,000 of the 82nd Airborne. That's just not going to work. That's a snatch operation. But, from what I've been told, the minimum figure is 20,000 boots on the ground they're going to need. Now, it's not just politics. They are clearly looking at a whole range of things. Venezuela has such a huge potential economy. The rare minerals and metals sitting under that country, the fact that it's the third or fourth or fifth largest stock exchange in the world.
And not to mention the world's largest proven oil reserves.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, as it's got this very interesting guy who's like what do you call him, an Alabama tick, dug in strongly there. There is a lot of power play going on there. But I'm surprised that the Vatican hasn't broken and become a total separate entity and tried to negotiate on its own behalf. That's what surprised me. I'd expected the Vatican to see the ship is sinking and therefore to negotiate as a separate entity, and they're still not doing that.
No, they're not.
No.
You know, when I went to Italy to visit the P2, I mean, they took me around behind St. Peter's, and they clearly had the run of the place, Vatican City.
Yeah.
And they made it very clear they worshipped the Black Sun and they weren't Christian, you know.
Yeah.
And there they still are. And they seem to think that their orders came from Switzerland.
But they're still in physical human bodies, and they still have to exist on this planet. Therefore, they can be engaged with. And, you know, they've got to make some move. You know, from the alien point of view, if you have a race of aliens that are not very beneficial at all, they're very evil, but they're in a one-way street. And they have the technology to look ahead into the future and say, we're in a one-way street, we're going to hit the wall at some point. Don't we think we should be trying to get out of this? And so this is what we're seeing, but we're not seeing, in my opinion, a coordinated effort. We're seeing one or two people trying to open negotiations, and their board of directors has given them the okay just to open up tentative discussions. They've not yet got the full authority to sit down around a table and really go for it. And that's what they've got to do. This game playing, they can't go on with this, Ben. They have got to sit down and say, right, let's cut a deal. Because if they don't, they literally will be strung up and hung from lampposts. That is the way it will go in another 10, 15, 20 years, less than that.
I would say less than that. We've already seen, I mean, John McCain and George Bush Sr. are gone, and I'm pretty sure they didn't go voluntarily or naturally.
Yeah.
And
I agree. But that was all done quietly and behind closed doors. I'm talking about a time when it will not be done quietly. You know, one of the things about Adolf Hitler, now I've mentioned him already, but it's a very interesting way to look back. One of the things that really terrified Hitler was images of Mussolini being strung up and hung and the public kicking him and throwing things. And the same thing happened to Saddam Hussein almost, certainly to Gaddafi of Libya. So there is a history on this planet. Once the mob turn against an individual or a group, there's no stopping them. So it is better to engage now. It is better now to have a gentle handover, surely, than to keep this facade up. You know, that's
yeah. And you know, I've been pushing that, like saying, you know, there was a group of you know, rational, well-educated people who were part of the old system, the functioning and benevolent part of the old system, who want a smooth transition that's good for everybody. And then there's a group that just wants to lynch everybody, and then they're going to fight each other because none of them has a coherent vision of the future and which it is going to be, you know. Sure.
Exactly. I mean, you talk about food shortages, power shortages. That is exactly the way. That's what would happen if this place was just torn apart like that. And that is not the way to manage a planet. That's not the way to do the best for the human race. It has to be negotiated.
Yeah. Now, there's another thing I want to ask you about is we're having lots of indications something's scheduled for May. We have a new emperor in Japan, and we have Israeli elections in April. The prime minister of Belgium was going to quit, and he was told to wait until May. I think Japan's Prime Minister Abe, he's a brainless fool who just reads scripts, but they're trying to keep him until May because nobody wants to, you know. Are you hearing about something that they're trying?
I'm also hearing that there may be an election here in my country, in Great Britain, in May. and this is something that's been talked about under the table. It's not even made it to the newspapers, but I am seriously hearing a possibility of an election in Great Britain in May. I'm also hearing of possible Earth movements, some sort of earthquake or something around about that time. Now, whether that's just coincidental or I just don't know, but it seems to be that May is going to be a change of one energy to another. So yes, I'm picking that up as well, Ben.
But I'm also getting the feeling that it's going to be the old regime trying to survive by offering limited reforms in May, and that we need to see something bigger and more radical before that time, possibly in March.
That's why I talked about the French Revolution. That was my point. I think that it is all down to the US military, bottom line. That's what it's down to. They're the only organization on the planet that can bring certain key individuals to answer questions and are strong enough to resist anything within the United States trying to spring them. And if the military don't do it.
When I first contacted the U.S. military about this stuff, they're telling me that the private armies, like Blackwater and stuff, that had been built up by Bush made it impossible for them to, at that point, to do anything. And I suggested that they, ally themselves with the Chinese and the Russians, and then they would have the power to do so. And as far as I can tell, they are connected at that level. The militaries of China, the US, and Russia are on the same page. They're all from this planet, and they all want to protect this planet. And I think they're doing it. I think it is happening. But yeah, what happened to these tribunals? They were supposed to already being started, and then said they shut down the U.S. government, they cut off the funding, and they bought themselves time until February 15th. What's going on there? I think there was a serious financial threat, and also it looks like the old regime, as far as I can tell, they announced the reopening of the government for 3 weeks. The same day they announced that people weren't going to get the tax refunds they thought they were. So it looks like they, put their hands in that piggy bank to keep themselves going for a bit longer. But it's a limited thing. They can't go on forever. They're bankrupt.
I agree. I think what Trump, from what I'm hearing, is that Trump gave into it because his advisors said, if you order a state of national emergency now, the public won't think you've exhausted the diplomatic side. They'll think it's not right. If you go through this, you give in, you give them till 15th of Feb, and then the Democrats still don't come forward, then the public are much more likely to see that you had no alternative. So whatever is going to happen, that's the thinking in his head, I'm told, that he's going to call a state of national emergency in the middle of February onwards, because he feels he's done everything he can. So there's that one aspect. The second aspect, I don't understand how an American military of 1 million men with National Guard feels that it's not called Blackwater now. They've changed the name now. But
they call it the Academy and whatever. They're not a problem at this point. I was talking about many years ago.
Yeah, you're right. But now that's not the issue, because the military could probably control 75% of the states of the US, I would think, easily. So I don't understand what the issue is. They just should get on.
The issue is that they won't get their paychecks.
Yeah, but the thing is that
I've been trying to tell them, you don't need paychecks. What you need is to physically, occupy the main, commodity transportation routes, and make sure everybody's got food and basics, and then worry about a new currency after that. I mean, well, our ancestors came up with the story of King Midas, where everything he touched turned to gold, and he starved to death, right? Underneath all this financial wizardry is the real world, food and shelter and stuff. And that's what you got to get your hands on. And the rest is superfluous. And I've been trying to convince them of this, yes, go ahead and let them turn off the ATMs. Just make sure you got, everything, all the logistics planned for such an event. And call their bluff. Say, all right, we don't need the funny paper anymore.
Yeah,
we're going to just, take it out of circulation and come up with something better.
I think that what the bad guys did quite successfully over the last 6 weeks was attack the Dow Jones by hammering the Dow Jones and making it lose 3,000-4,000 points. That was a deliberate threat to the US military, who get so much of their black funding off the back of the Dow Jones. That was their threat. But my understanding is there's at least 8 weeks of money being stored away specifically to pay wages for the military. So they've got this fallback position. But again, it's because they don't control the money men. The military does not control the money, and that is the issue. And if we don't do it in 2019, Ben, then honestly, I don't see how they're going to do it at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they haven't physically occupied the Federal Reserve branches.
Exactly. Do away with it. I mean, we know that a president who did try to do it lost his life, but he didn't have the military behind him. This guy, Trump, was put in by the military. Therefore, are they going back on their plan now? Are they gone chicken, or are they really going to do something about it? So, for me, it can't come soon enough. The people are ready for the truth. They're not kids. They're not children. Let them make a decision. Stop hiding from them.
Yeah, I'm not in touch, but I mean, at this point, I'm getting the feeling that it's a little bit like the Naked Emperor, as far as the corporate media is concerned, that nobody really believes their story about the king's clothing anymore. I mean, what percentage of people are still drinking this corporate Kool-Aid? I mean, it's sort of like the Soviet Union, right? At a certain point, there was a collective decision that no, communism is not going to be the way of the future, and then boom, it changed. Yes. And we're getting to that same turning point. You know the story of the 100th monkey?
Yes, of course.
Well, that was actually, can I tell it again? Because it's such a good story. It actually happened in an island off Japan, where they put sweet potatoes on the beach so that the monkeys would come out to the beach and then they could watch them interact. And a young female macaque got the idea of washing her potato in the seawater, and I got the sand off it, and it got salt on it. And then her brother imitated her, and then their mother, and then some of her mother's friends, and then some of the lower-ranking males started doing it. And finally, the big boss male comes in, what's going on here? And she says, okay. And they all start doing it, right? And that's the 100th monkey.
Yeah, but
and we're reaching that point.
Yeah, but also what you missed out there, Ben, was that what was proven was that, strangely, the consciousness, they found monkeys in other locations doing it as well. Monkeys that had not physically come into contact with the original group. And therefore, there was absolute evidence of a group consciousness. And that's what humanity has and doesn't yet fully understand. It has a group consciousness. It has the capability to move itself from one to another if only and that critical mass.
Yeah, and we're actually, what's happening now is we have two competing group consciousnesses.
Yeah.
We have the old, paradigm where it was 19 terrorists who did 9/11, and Saddam Hussein was evil and had something to do about stealing oil. And then we have a whole new paradigm where it's like, we want to take control of the financial system away from these elites and fix up the planet, and we're sort of in a shift. And there's two competing paradigms, and the new one is getting stronger, and it's almost ready to take over, I think. So yeah, we're have some sort of change in the global collective conscious. It's not quite there yet, but we're close. And if we push, we can make it happen, I think.
I totally agree, but I know that there are only two ways that can happen. One is hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, which is not in their interest, because as long as the ATM machine is working, as long as they can sit and watch the football match, and as long as the store selling burgers is open, they won't do it. So I'm afraid it's going to fall to those people that have a higher awareness, which is the military, which are the good guys within the secret intel organizations. They've got to do it. They've got to do it. And they'll do it. The people will follow. That's a given. The people follow. Once the truth is known, they will be supported. But someone's got to be brave. 2 years ago, I did a conference just before Christmas down in the West Country here in Great Britain. And one of my slides was a dark room, a door with light coming through the door, and a woman with a hand on the door handle. And I said to the audience, that's the human race. The door is open, the light is coming through, but they're terrified to step through. So somebody's got to step through the door, turn around and say, look, I didn't die. Come through. It's better this side of the wall. That's where we really are.
It's interesting because I use a similar analogy with the Japanese ruling class, where you have this lion that's been in a cage for so long.
Right.
Now the cage door is open, but it's afraid to go out of the cage, you know.
It's exactly the same as what I've said. Exactly, Ben. Exactly.
Yeah, and in their case, you know, the controllers who were murdering their prime ministers and stuff aren't in charge anymore.
No.
You know, and the Japanese can actually, you know, they had a very good system. I came here originally to study their system because they had decades of double-digit economic growth, and they had the lowest gap between the rich and poor in anywhere in the OECD. I came to study this system, and it worked. And then the Americans forced them to dismantle it. And now they've had 20, 30 years of stagnation. And the Singaporeans are still using that system, and they're as rich as anybody on earth. And the Chinese, you know, follow that system, and they've done very well by it too. And I'm saying, let's, you know, we take the best practices from around the world, and we use them, and then we keep tweaking based on what actually works, and let's start fixing up this planet.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what always drew me to you, Ben, was the intel that you had was very close to what I had, although they were coming from somewhat different sources. And to be truthful with you, when the White Dragon Group can connect with some of the military in the US and some of the other groups, then you've got this movement. I've spoken to both Red Dragon and White Dragon groups, not face to face. It's been on Skype, I have to be honest. There is some coming together here, but one group is very much into profit and control, and one group is much more about rebuilding. But unless across the world, different peoples with different languages, unless they can all find a common thread and cause a peaceful revolution, then it's not going to be done in an organized fashion. And if it's not done in an organized fashion, we could be thrown into the dark ages. And that's the threat here. And the reality here is that ultimately we're all living a lie to a lesser or greater extent. And I think that the time has come where I'm personally sick of it. One of the reasons 8 years ago I went public with my story was because I was just so saddened and infuriated how anything along those lines is just bottled up and kept quiet. And I thought, no, people have a right to know. They have a right to do their own research and to learn. And, you know, we are being treated as slaves. We are slaves, and the public don't accept that. They think they're free. They see the slave as a black man picking cotton, and they don't understand that there's a very clever operation on this planet, and they are paid slaves. And, you know, perhaps some of them are happy doing it, but most of them are not, Ben. And so I want to see change because I just believe in fairness. That's it.
And, you know, I think we've going to use up an hour, which is stretching things for people, especially in this internet age. But I'd like to conclude by asking you what you think of the idea of a jubilee and a one-off write-off of all debt, and then a one-off redistribution of assets, just especially ill-gotten assets. Like a reset. It's like if you don't mow your lawn every once in a while, it stops being a garden, it becomes a jungle.
Sure.
And we need to do that with the economy. Every once in a while, you have to rebalance things. And right now, things are sort of kilter with like 0.1% of the population owning more than 90%. And that's killing the goose that lays the golden egg, even for the 0.1%. I
agree. My daughter went some years ago on a demonstration in London. They lied about how many. It was 100,000 people, 100,000 people literally walking through London. And of the 100,000 people, there was a 30-second new just gave it 30 seconds on the news. And of the 100,000 people, they took a picture of my daughter. And she was the one that appeared. And her banner was, why does 1% of the population own 90% of the planet? Do you know what? She lost her job 3 days later. 3 days later. So they're very powerful, this evil group. Now, you asked a really important about the Jubilee, and I agree, but I have one caveat. I think that's exactly, and I'm up for that. But my caveat is, there's absolutely no point in giving money to people to bring it all to balance and then to let it go to rot again. There must be education with it. So if you say to an organization, let's just say a hospital, it's been running on a loss, or you say to a guy who's sleeping homeless in the street, I'm going to give you the money, you can have a new set of clothes, and we're going to have proper food, or the hospital's going to have a new scanner. If you then walk away, they'll just collapse back again. So there has to be an oversight. There has to be, we've given you this money, make sure.
Absolutely. And this is just, you know, like I say, I've studied the systems that they've got. You know, the West was really good at science and really good at military-industrial warfare, but the Asians are actually better at organizing, you know, everybody working for the greater.
Much better.
I mean, even linguistically, the English or the European word for government means government, control minds.
Yes.
And in Japanese, it's matsurigoto, which means organizing festivals.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's a much nicer idea. I mean, you know, I'm a Westerner, but still, and I'd rather organize a festival than be a mind control.
Look, there's what I call King Solomon's gold. That's because I'm very connected to the old times. I call it King Solomon's gold, and it's time for that gold to come out of the caves, and it's time to use to rebalance the system. Yes.
Yeah, and I have been offered a chance to use the Manchu gold, which is, I'm not sure, it's $300 billion worth, which is in the vaults in Basel, Switzerland, and use it to start this future planning agency. And I've been lobbying everybody, let's do it. You know, that's a real here now, concrete way to get the ball rolling.
You should.
And this doesn't, you know, upset any of the existing power structures or organizations. It's like when the Chinese went away from communism, they didn't dismantle the state-owned companies. They built new stuff around them. And so it wasn't like a huge social dislocation like we saw with the fall of the Soviet Union. And we're saying the same. Or to quote the Canadian marijuana farmers, let's overgrow the government.
That is brilliant. Look, listen, it's been fantastic to speak to you.
Yeah.
As always, we agree 100%.
All right. Well, let's keep in touch and work together, and let's, you know, use our mutual connections to make this happen.
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks for talking with me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.